So hello everybody, it's Steve Bates at the BIA for our Brexit webinar for November. I'm joined by Laura Collister, our Brexit lead. For those of you with the countdown in mind, we have 122 days until Brexit, or if you think there's going to be a transition, 744 days till the end of transition. What are we looking to cover today? Well, I hope today we can give you some detail that matches with the member briefing that went out, written briefing that went out earlier in the week on the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. And we'll give you our best guess as to what might happen next, what the process is, and it's quite important to understand the minutiae of Westminster politics to understand what might happen next, and I think it does matter on this occasion. Then we'll look at the UK political environment, what's been going on in terms of select committees and scrutiny of deal and no deal preparation, some details on ongoing work on the recent MHRA consultation for our sector. And we'll try and give you a flavour as from discussions with members as to what members have reflected to us they're thinking about, and perhaps a framework for what you might want to think about between now and Christmas. We'll then give you a flavour from the EU, what's been happening there, and an update on activity from our perspective and what's happening next. As you know, we put these each month onto our YouTube channel, and this was what we talked about last month. They're all still there on the BIA YouTube channel if you find them of use. So let me move on to the negotiations, because it's been quite an important month for negotiations. And for those of you who've been with us for many years on these broadcasts, these webinars, you may remember this slide from a couple of years ago, which looked at the plot for how the negotiations would have to move. And we finally moved through sort of the second part of part two. So it starts at the top with the UK invoking Article 50. There's discussions of withdrawals, there's negotiations, there's a draft deal done, and that's the bit we've got to. And then the new bit that's arrived since this slide was built by the BBC many years ago is there's the need for a meaningful vote in the UK Parliament before it's approved from the EU by at least 20 countries and ratification by the EU Parliament. So we've moved down this plot for the first time in a long time, and that's why we think it's a significant new stage. And you can see that there's still further to go, but a blast from the past for those of you who've been with us for a while. I'll take you through a little bit on the implications of the withdrawal agreement for our sector. It's a 585-page legal whopper. It sets out how the UK and the EU will operate during a transition period and builds on a previous version. The key thing, I think, from our perspective is the detail on our sector hasn't changed much, and I'll touch on some of the things that we've gone through in these webinars earlier, which have pretty much stayed the same. So some detail on the withdrawal agreement. There's a section on people, which is a new bit, and as you can see, right to reside in host state, residence documentation may be needed, no visa to enter and leave, 5 years residence gives permanent right to residence, worker rights will apply in the transition, mutual recognition and professional qualifications, and this will apply in Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. So an important section there. If there is a deal, this is how issues around people will be managed. Goods on the market. Again, for those of you who've been with us down the months will know that this is a hardy perennial for our sector. And I think the key thing here is that this is the same wording as we discussed in March, which hasn't changed. And you need to combine the triple bits of placing on the market, making it available, and supply of a good to get to a description of this. And we think that what this means is products placed on the market when it's made available for supply to the ultimate consumer or user. It doesn't have to be physically shipped, and that remains our understanding of goods on the market, and there is some legal definition of goods on the market. So this should mean that if there is an agreement and a transition period, a good is placed on the market and is straightforward if it is available to supply to the ultimate user. It doesn't have to be in the country for goods on the market reasons to be supplied. So that's our understanding. Regulation, again, largely the same as previous versions, but we have dug in, and Laura's done a great job here in finding the individual wording changes that have been made for the regulation pieces. So it states that UK experts may, on invitation, exceptionally attend meetings of agencies. And what the wording change that we see here, and this matters particularly for MHRA representation at the European Medicines Agency from a life science sector point of view, is this used to say, have the word case-by-case basis in the draft stuff from earlier in the year. That's come out. So it's simplified, on invitation, exceptionally attend meetings of agencies. I don't think we've yet tested whether this is makes it much simpler. So if there's sort of a one-off tick, yes, it makes sense for you to be invited once. You can attend a series of meetings, but it suggests that the case doesn't need to be made every single time on a case-by-case basis now. So not sure whether that's good or bad, but we can see that that's a change. And of course, the UK doesn't have voting rights in EU institutions, in regulators during transition, but people will continue to share information. So again, no big changes to where we've been before, apart from the loss of the words case by case in this one. So what does this mean from March if a deal is done? There should be free movement of authorised products released by QP. It should be straightforward for investigational medicinal products released by QP, and intermediates, as well as CE marked medical devices made available supply. So it should be, touch wood, straightforward to continue to operate for our sector if a deal is done, ratified, etc., under the withdrawal agreement. On trade issues with regard to the withdrawal agreement, again, sorry for summarising many pages into a few bullet points. Administrative cooperation procedures will be launched before the end of transition. The common VAT system will continue to apply through transition period, and the UK will continue to be part of a single customs union until that is agreed. So it should be business continues as normal. R&D and funding. The European Investment Bank is going to maintain activities to sustain operations that were ongoing at the end of transition period until their final maturity. The UK remains liable for financial operations approved before by the EIB before the date of entry into force of the agreement, but the UK will cease to be an active member and won't be able to continue to receive funds as it did before. This matters if you're in venture capital or looking to use EIB or EIF funding for your sector. So again, no big changes or changes to what was expected here, in line with expectation. And that's a whistle-stop tour through the withdrawal agreement. I'll now hand over to Laura to talk about the other document that was published this week, the political declaration. Laura.
So alongside the withdrawal agreement, the political declaration was published. This is a document which sets out some broad parameters for the future relationship. Originally a 6-page document had been published, and you might have seen that BIA, along with the ABPI and NHS Confederation, called for patients to be included in the declaration more and to be a higher priority. In the 26-page document, there were more references to patients. Health security had been mentioned and is now a bigger section in the final document, and medicines regulation is in there. Generally, I think where we are is the tone reflects what the sector's been talking about, but we need more detail about it, what it actually looks like in practice. So this is just broad parameters. It's we would like things to be negotiated, and so without knowing what the final deal is, it's hard to sort of know how this will work for the sector. But in terms of regulation, all the way through the document, there's long discussions around regulatory cooperation and alignment in lots of different areas. That includes cooperation between with certain agencies, including the European Medicines Agency. So that reference in the final document wasn't in the first one, so it was really welcome to see that. There are other bits of sort of regulatory areas they're looking at, like standardization, technical regulations, conformity assessment, accreditation, labeling. These were things that sort of general areas they were talking about, weren't specific to our sector, but obviously would apply to us if the right deals were negotiated. In terms of trade, not that much detail there, but there was discussion around looking at facilitated arrangements and technologies. You remember back in the summer, there was lots of discussion around the facilitated customs arrangements, which didn't go down that well at the EU level, but the declaration starts talking about facilitated arrangements and technologies again. Talks also about sort of mutual recognition of trusted trader programs and cooperation. It also notes that the document would also enable the UK to have its independent free trade agreements and start those negotiations. In terms of R&D and funding, there was a big section in here on shared partnerships, and that included participation for the UK in some programs, including science and innovation, as long as there was the right financial contribution, and that there would be fair treatment of participants, management and consultation to the, of cooperation. It also talks about dialogue in those shared areas of interest, again including science and innovation, and then it followed up to say that in those areas the parties would recognise the importance of mobility and temporary movement of objects to enable cooperation. Additionally, what was in here, which wasn't actually in the government's Brexit white paper in the summer, was the UK's intention to explore options for a future relationship with the European Investment Bank. So that's something that we talked about back in September 2016 when we first came out with our ask. Wasn't in the white paper, but it's back in here, so it's good to see that back. In terms of people, this is basically a reciprocal system enabling short visa-free travel and sort of special conditions for purposes around research, study, training, etc.
So thank you. So that's our whistle-stop tour through the two big documents. The BIA put out its position on the withdrawal agreement and political declaration, stating that the key thing was that no deal must be avoided, that the deal that was reached significantly improves the chances of stability and increasing certainty for business, that we talked about how we've already put up with disruption, duplication and uncertainty, and we still have more concerns about how medicines regulation will work in practice during a transition. It was positive, as Laura said, to see that the political declaration, the aspirational document, addresses many of the priorities that the BIA and others in the life science sector have advocated for, and I think that that's a positive. But I think we have been conscious that there's still a long way to go on this, and therefore we are keen to see what happens with the parliamentary discussion, certainly in the UK, going forward, which I'll turn to in a second. Before I turn to that, I'm just going to mention one thing which we've not done a lot on in this briefing, which is the backstop position. The backstop position is the position that follows if there was to be a transition but no agreement before the end of the transition, the UK would fall into a position known as the backstop, which I think may be prominent in the political discussion. We've chosen not to talk about it in great depth here because, in a sense, it's unlikely to be a position that the companies need to prepare for at least for a couple of years. So we've not focused on the backstop as a practical position. We tried to make you give you an understanding of operating in transition and operating in no deal and where we may be going there. So if I can turn to the process of what's likely to happen next. So they've done a deal. It now has to come back to this UK House of Commons, where there is the workup we've seen in the last couple of weeks ahead of a meaningful vote, with possible amendments expected the week after next. If the Prime Minister wins the vote, there will then be the withdrawal agreement bill will continue its passage through Parliament, and essentially the European Parliament will vote on the deal. And if the European Parliament approves it, then the Council of the EU will get to adopt it, and the deal will be done at the same time as the UK Parliament also has to give consent to the ratification of it as a treaty. But if it all goes well from the 11th, then game on. However, and I'm indebted to the Daily Mail for this little graphic, is that likely to happen? So the key thing here is that Theresa May has to win 319 MPs to pass her deal through the UK Parliament. But that may or may not happen. So what are the scenarios? So if she wins, that's all great, and we're on for a deal and away we go. If she loses, I think there are various scenarios. She may try again, the middle one of these three red options in the thing. There is a European summit on the 13th or 14th. Does she look to tweak it, come back again the week after or early after Christmas with a revised proposal? Does she change tack and say, well, okay, I didn't get that, but maybe I now want to be Norway, or we're going to go full no deal? Or does she say, that's it, I'm up, somebody else needs to take this over and there's a leadership contest? Who knows? There could be a second vote if there's a sort of try again strategy that may result in a win, or it may result in another loss. Could she plough on following losing a second vote? Could there then be a Commons vote of no confidence or an election? Could Theresa May endeavour to lead the country through a no-deal Brexit? Could MPs force a second referendum? All of these options are possible, and they all rely on the parliamentary maths. So unusually, I hope we're going to, I don't like to take people into too much detail of Westminster politics and why it matters, but on this one, I think it probably does matter. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of my expectation or understanding of where this might go. So it could go a number of ways, and let's see. So again, thanks to the Daily Mail, let's take ourselves to the whip's offices of the government. They've got to get to 318 votes to say yes. How many can they count on? Well, the government people, the people who are members of parliament who work for the government or are in the payroll, it's 178. With the Daily Mail reckons that 48 Tories are undeclared or moderate, and they might be likely to support the government. There's a group they've called Dad's Army, which is the European research group, Rees-Mogg and others, who they think are hardcore Brexiteers, unlikely to support the deal. There's other Brexiteers, 53, who didn't sign the letter to say the Prime Minister should go, but are equally fairly hard on not liking this deal and wanting out, 53 of those. And then there's a few Conservative MPs who would like to remain in the EU or think a second referendum is important. On the other side, you've got the opposition, you've got the people who will vote for what the Labour front bench tell them to do, the Labour loyalists, 237. A few rebels who either want a deal, and Daily Mail estimates these at 10. You've got the DUP, Democratic Unionist Party of the in Northern Ireland at 10. They were supporting the government, but they're now saying they won't support the deal, so they're in the no column. The Scottish National Party, 35 of those, and then others, Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru, Greens, some of the people who've lost the whips have either suspended Tories, suspended Labour MPs, which way will they go? So you can see that if you try and add up these to 318, it's quite hard to do it, because many of these groups, if you put them together, don't get you over the magic number. If you look at the right-hand side here, if you had the payroll vote, the moderates, the Remainers, the soft Brexiteers, Dad's Army, and the DUP, so that's essentially the vast majority of the Conservatives and the DUP, you get to 325, but it's very hard to see how that will happen. So I think it's important to view the context of the next couple of weeks and the deal as to whether it can get through Parliament. And my reading of Parliament as it is at the moment is it's unlikely that the Prime Minister's deal will sail through, although she is obviously working hard outside of Parliament to get that to happen. Sorry for taking you through this in some detail, but I think it is what matters at the moment, because you need to understand the context in which it operates. I'm going to keep going with the political context within the UK. So if you take a step back from that sort of parliamentary maths, the Conservative Party in the UK remains fundamentally split. We've lost 5 ministers from the government on account of the deal, and 19 in total this year. However, the rebels against the Prime Minister, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, said that they were going to mount a coup against the Prime Minister, get a new Prime Minister. They didn't have the numbers to do it. So we've seen that. The Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland have said they're no longer voting with the government, and have put their money where their mouth is by not voting the finance bill. So the Prime Minister's touring the country and the world, selling the deal over the heads of parliamentarians with a grid of activity over the next couple of weeks. I think the Labour Party is in an interesting place. They remain demanding a general election and want to vote against the agreement. But John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor this week, has said that he could see it would be possible that Labour might support a second referendum. Who knows? And of course, for those of you who don't know which side you're on, or if you're interested in both sides, I'm not talking about Leave and Remain, I'm talking about BBC versus ITV. There's been a lot of talk about a TV debate happening the Sunday before the meaningful vote, and that will either be on BBC if Theresa May gets her way after Strictly Come Dancing, or on ITV if Jeremy Corbyn gets his way before the I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here grand final. But you can see that there is something that looks akin to political campaigns going on in the UK as part of the environment. Taking a step away from the heated environment of Westminster to the calm of the committee corridors in Westminster, both many of the select committees have been engaged with the discussions around Brexit and have had a look at our sector in some detail. And I'm going to take you through each of those in turn. So, the Health Select Committee, you're going to do this or I'm going to do this? I'm doing this one. Okay, so yeah, the Health Select Committee have focused on no deal planning, and the chair of the committee, Dr. Sarah Williston MP, has both written to the Health Secretary and raised some concerns, had some sessions with key figures like the Health Secretary, Chris Wormold, and others this week, and you can see making sure that they are satisfied as parliamentarians that everything that needs to be done for access to medicines to continue in a no-deal scenario is happening, and that's obviously feeding into the context of the meaningful vote. This letter is quite useful. It's available on the internet if you are interested. BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the BEIS committee have also been holding more parliamentary scrutiny on the impact of leaving the EU. Again, lots of questions around what happens in a no-deal scenario here. Is the stockpiling happening? What could be happening here? Again, more scrutiny of that. There's a group called the Liaison Select Committee, which is all the chairs of the select committees coming together to form a supergroup. They met and questioned the Prime Minister recently, and again, medicines and medicine supply remains a high issue of concern, particularly in a no-deal scenario for parliamentarians in this way. The European Medicines Agency came up in a particular question as to whether the political declaration, the second of the two documents we talked about, the one Laura talked about, had apparently looser commitment to UK participation than previous statements by Jeremy Hunt. And the Prime Minister responded that they're, in an answer to a question, it needs to operate in a way that's suitable for the UK, and said that the ESA model could be a basis for UK cooperation with the EMA. So there is talk of the issues that are important to us. We're on the agenda. None of this is where it's going to end up in general, but you can see that there's increased focus on this, and much of this chat is around in Westminster, if you want to follow it in detail, as we do, I hope, on your behalf. Changing now to another part of our work. You'll remember that the MHRA put out, the UK Medicines Regulator, their consultation on how they would operate if there was to be no deal. They need to get a legislative framework ready for if there is no deal. And we've been following up in this month work that's been done in previous months as a result of the discussion that we've had with members. So member companies have been concerned about the UK's proposals on orphan medicines designation, and that there wouldn't be a duplication of the EU pre-approval orphan designation, and the concerns around removal of R&D incentives, and the challenge that they didn't put in the legislation there'll be fee reductions for scientific advice for small companies, etc. What we've done through our expert group is we've carried out a survey targeting SMEs, and we are presenting those findings to both the MHRA and the Department of Health and Social Care, so that we hope that they can address our concerns as they come back with proposals in the new year. So we've continued to make the case on the specifics of these points, and we believe that that's going on. So before the Christmas break, if people are having a Christmas break, when we will be doing one of our December webinars, so in a few weeks' time, December the 19th, we're doing a couple of Wednesdays, 3 Wednesdays' time. What will we know by then? So we'll either be in a position where the meaningful vote has been won, the deal is on, the withdrawal bill will be continuing its parliamentary passage, the European Parliament and the EU 27 will be ratifying, and we'll be preparing for transition. You can pay your money and take your choice on this, or we'll be in a position where the vote has been lost. Perhaps there'll be market reaction to the political crisis. We'll have continued political volatility, and there'll be an increased focus on the no deal preparation that we've been doing for some time, particularly medicines regulation and access across the borders, and as well as for people. And I think that that will probably be in the phase of emergency planning. So that's why the vote matters, and I think that's why we can see two distinct futures fairly clearly hoving into view before Christmas. Endeavoured to try and put together some thoughts as to what might be front of mind in some of the key bits, if you think about it, from what would happen in terms of if the vote goes through or if the vote is lost. So let's do the happy Theresa May side of this slide first off. I'm very happy Theresa May, smiling on December the 11th as she wins the vote. You can see we'll be focusing on, okay, how do we turn the political declaration in medicines regulatory cooperation into something more structured? How do we work on that? Come on EMA, how are we going to talk about that? What's the process for doing that discussion? People will be, if it's from people, it will be, we know that there's a settled status system coming in. How do we do that? Let's make sure that we're ready for the launch of that for people who work for companies in the new year. How do we help you with that? On trade, I think there's some bits that we'll need to work on. How does the customs system, how that's going to work? How will logistics companies work? Are there things that we need to do on free trade agreements or mutual recognition, especially with companies that are outside the EU? Some more work to do there, but that's where we'll be in the detail. And if there is a plan to have associate membership of Horizon Europe, how do we flesh that out? What's that going to look like? Is there something that we can do with the British Business Bank, with the European Investment Bank and others? So that will be areas of work where we'd build on our position and keep going for a further period of negotiation. If the vote's lost, I think that we'll be having a much sharper focus on marketing authorization holder presence in the EU for companies that don't have one at present. How the EMA and MHRA will work in a no deal scenario. How clinical trials will be focused and batch release from the UK into the EU. Again, how will that work? That's an as yet unanswered question. I think we'll have immediate questions to the UK government on what will happen to the status of EU workers in the UK, and we'll imagine that a new immigration system, which has been talked about, we need to see the detail of what that is and explain that to people. I think we'll be on trade, we'll be into more detailed discussion around how we operate in a no-deal scenario, particularly logistics, looking at alternative supply chains, supply routes. Are there what are the implications of the potential loss of access to EU free trade agreements and mutual recognition agreements, and what do we do on Horizon 2020? So I think those are sort of how we're thinking about it, and perhaps you also have views as to how you're approaching it, but that's how we're thinking about it. Laura, I know that you've had great engagement from members on many of these things. Some of them are sort of high level, some of them are in the details. What are you looking for input from members on at this current time?
So I've got a small list of things which I've been asked for feedback on, or I'm looking to do some work on. So firstly, mutual recognition agreements. If anyone, especially so obviously all members, but if anyone in particular that are SMEs have some priorities for grandfathering the current ones, and for future content and locations would really welcome any insight or input into that. The Migration Advisory Committee, which advises government on migration, is running a consultation on the UK shortage occupation list. So whilst it isn't particularly Brexit, it's very timely given the fact that we're waiting for the immigration white paper. So any suggestions for life sciences specific roles would be really good to hear. Office for Life Sciences, which is obviously our sponsoring organisation within government, is looking at the impact of Brexit on SMEs, and I think they would really welcome some short discussions with any SMEs in membership that are having specific impacts. So is it around, is there an impact on tax, is there an impact on the business? So they're trying to sort of work out, get some evidence around what the impact is. They're also doing a piece of work on services and barriers that companies may face when providing or procuring services internationally. So any input anyone has on that would also be welcome. And then finally, I'm not seeking input, this is just a flag, and if you're interested in attending, joining, or want more information, please do contact me. But we've mentioned it before that we're looking to set up a trade group, which will cover lots of different areas. So some of the separation issues and what borders on day one should look like, what the new customs system would look like, but also what's the opportunity in terms of free trade agreements and mutual recognition with countries such as the US, or are there other countries that you think we should be focusing on? We're going to do the first meeting at the committee summit on 14th of February, so Valentine's Day. And my email address is at the bottom, so please contact me with any suggestions, comments, or anything. Also, just to flag that we did a members briefing on the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. If you've not received it and want it, then also please send me an email. So in terms of carrying on, talking from the EU perspective, so whilst we've been very focused on the EU, focused on the UK, EU's obviously been looking at the UK, possibly a little bit worried about some of the politics happening. The Commission President has said quite consistently that the deal that is there is the only deal possible, and that there will be no better deal. They said that at the European Summit, which signed off the agreement last Sunday. Today, Donald Tusk, who's the European Council President, was at the G20 and was talking about Brexit again. And he was saying a few days before the vote in the House of Commons, it's becoming more clear that this deal is the best possible, in fact, the only possible one. He also said that if it's rejected, the only options would be no deal or no Brexit at all. Moving sort of onto regulatory perspective, so we understand from some companies that the EMA have been contacting them over the last week or so about moving marketing authorisations prior to the 30th of November. So this is potentially a little bit earlier than those companies were thinking that they would need to be done. I think there's sort of, we understand it's raising some concern within the companies, but I think also there's maybe a view that some of the smaller companies haven't moved their, are taking a bit more of a wait and see approach to Brexit, whereas the larger companies who obviously have a lot more authorisations have moved their marketing authorisations. So EMA is contacting the SMEs, and if you have any input or insight into this, we're also happy to hear that. One thing to flag, going on to Horizon Europe, the discussion in the Parliament a couple of weeks ago, and where it was amended to allow non-EU countries like Switzerland, US and UK to become associate members, and there was also an amendment that would allow organisations to lead EU projects. One MP said has agreed to leave the door open for UK to be able to participate in the programme coordinating projects. We have created the legal framework for the Brexit Agreement on Research and Innovation. So this is obviously was then reflected in the political declaration when there was lots of discussion around science and innovation partnerships. And so this is sort of some of the technical bit to enable that to happen if the UK does become an associate member of Horizon Europe.
Thanks, Laura. And I think it's this is it. There are some positives in the detail of these things where I think you can see that if there was to be a deal, there is some sensible routes where further negotiation for the issues that we've advocated for the sector may be possible. So I think that is positive. I'm just going to give a brief update on what we've been doing from the BIA, and then we'll be happy to take some questions. So do get typing if you've got some thoughts or questions. So what have we been doing in the last month? Well, we've responded to the two big documents, the withdrawal agreement, political declaration, and sent the member briefing out, which Laura mentioned went out on Tuesday. It's available for you if you've not got it. Email Laura. We've had continued ministerial meetings. The Life Science Council has met, and we've tackled issues of supply. It was great to see many of you at the Brexit Lead Network earlier in November. Laura went with the International Council of Biotech Associations to meet global figures in Geneva, home of WTO, WIPO, WHO. So good to make sure we're engaged there. We've also been at Europa Bio and engaged with them on Brexit. And perhaps colleagues from Europa Bio have joined us on this one. I hope they have. And the Brexit Health Alliance have also held a parliamentary event which has informed parliamentarians and scrutiny committee members ahead of the discussion that we've talked about prior to this. On no deal, we've followed up on the MHRA consultation with the MHRA, and we've given you a little bit of a flavour of some of the issues, orphans and others, that we're working on there. And we're continuing to be closely involved in the government's medicine supply contingency planning programme. It doesn't stop before Christmas, and amongst the tinsel and mince pies, we'll also be preparing for the EU relationship group with ministers on the 6th and discussing with bio trade engagement and how we may have some parameters for a trade deal. That's obviously a bit uncertain, but I think we need to be ready for that if things are coming. So those are what we've been working on. If I can, and summarise it, we've moved to a new stage on Brexit. There is a deal which sets out the parameters of it. That means, and I think the big new thing from our sector is that the EU are signed up to discuss possible medicines regulatory cooperation going forward, something we've not had through all the months prior to this. But Westminster's febrile, and politics and the votes coming up are likely to have a significant impact on where we're going, and where we exit Christmas rather than where we go into Christmas, I think is uncertain. Because your ability to do the maths on the 319, I hope, is better than mine, but I'm not sure anybody's got clear lines on that one. One of the nice things about doing this webinar is we're able to say our position remains the same quite a lot, and I've had this consistently for, I think, 2.5 years now. So these are the issues that you put to us as the ones we should continue to lobby on. We continue to go with them, and at least there's consistency from us on the importance of these issues. With that, I'm going to open it up to questions and see if there's anything that we can help you with whilst I take a slurp of tea. It looks like we've pummeled you all into silence. Oh no, somebody has come in. Sebastian, your question is, the BP has communicated that the British Pharmacopoeia has said that nothing changes for them because they belong to the Council of Europe. Is there any impact on them from the withdrawal agreement? Good question. Don't know the answer to that one. No one has raised that there is an impact from the withdrawal agreement with me, but we shall chase it down if we've got that wrong. I don't think there is any impact. Council of Europe matters are largely independent of the EU position with the EU, although there is some interdependence if there are later rulings which mention the EU, or so it depends on the legal basis on which the text is based. Most of it is not dependent on EU or being a member of the EU, so I don't think it is, although there are some occasions where it can be, but I don't think this one is. If they're confident it's not affected, I would go with their analysis. Thank you for the question. I'm conscious that many of you are probably placing your bets on David Lidington to be the future Prime Minister as a result of the analysis as to who may win and lose in the UK Parliament. David Lidington is the sort of de facto Deputy Prime Minister at the moment, and is one of the people who people think might step into the breach if there were to be a lost vote for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister were to go, and somebody needed to cobble together a broader coalition. Government of national unity, or national government, as we saw under Ramsay MacDonald back in the 1930s. If you're looking for an outside bet, very much like you would in the Grand National, David Lidington to be the future Prime Minister is where I would be this time, and we'll see if I'm right when we do our next webinar. Unless there's anything else, I think I shall say thank you very much. Wish you a good month ahead. Remind you of the upcoming BIA events. We have a webinar next week on venture capital money, which is useful if you're looking for financing. Our next Brexit webinar will be 19th of December. We're doing it on the Wednesday rather than the Friday, on the basis that we think many people will be at their Christmas do's by the 21st. So it'll be the Wednesday afternoon. In January, we've got a Strategic Technologies in Life Science meeting ahead of the gala dinner, which is the big one, on the 24th, Thursday 24th, and our committee summit, which will have the new meeting on around trade at it on Valentine's Day. Our program for up and coming life science entrepreneurs is also scheduled for March. So with that, I'm going to thank you all. If you're not members and you want to join, John Cudlick will be delighted to hear from you. Our next briefing will be Wednesday the 19th, and registration will be open very soon. I hope it's been of use. Any feedback's welcome. Have a good one. Thank you very much.